Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme, we'll be getting an in-depth look at the state visit to the United Kingdom by the US President Donald Trump, where the red carpet has been rolled out in a spectacular way. We ask, what's the monetary value of a visit like this, and who stands to benefit more, the British or the Americans? Plus, we'll get the latest on the unfolding humanitarian disaster in Gaza. And that was President Trump in London speaking there. Well, he was greeted in Windsor by the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Kate, and shortly after that by the King and Queen. But despite the warm welcome, some experts have noted that this second historic visit comes under the shadow of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. And just days after the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer dismissed the British ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, over past ties to the late convicted sex offender. Well, let's get more on this state visit, and in particular, the security challenges that such a visit poses. Where we can speak now to Graham Wettone, who's a former Met police officer who was responsible for keeping the former US President George W. Bush safe during his November 2003 stay visit to the United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I was just looking at your Twitter feed and I saw that you'd posted about a no-fly zone over Windsor and how there had been a couple of arrests with regards to drones being used in that area. But that aside, does it look like things are going well so far?
Yes, it does. And I think the actual arrests were made because there were some images projected onto the side of Windsor Castle. I don't think they were arrested over drones, but the arrest, is my understanding, was because they projected some images of the president and Mr. Epstein onto the side of Windsor Castle. So those arrests, I think, were last night.
OK, I mean, some people are saying this is the most security for a presidential visit in British history. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, it does. I've been watching some of the footage this morning. A significant security operation, as there normally is when we have such a state visit, and from the President of the United States as well. We had similar in 2003, but probably not to the same scale that this now is. Bear in mind, Mr. Trump's had assassination attempts. There was assassination last week of Charlie Kirk. So my understanding, my interpretation would be that all the security arrangements would have been reviewed and, where needed, even enhanced in some places after last week. So the whole area around Windsor and around Chequers would have had another review. Security experts would have had a look at the security arrangements in place, where they're over and covert measures being put in place to make sure they're all protected. And bear in mind, both venues are very well secured anyway. They're used to security operations and plans. They are both secure premises. That security is enhanced when there's people in residence, and I think there'd be an extra level of enhancement now we've got such important people staying there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the killing of Charlie Kirk, the fact that President Trump has himself been the target of an assassination attempt, or more than one. But, you know, it was a pretty tense environment as well back in 2003 when President George W. Bush came to the United Kingdom, of course, in the context of the Iraq war. And, you know, that brought some 1 million people out onto the streets of London. And I'm just wondering how much planning went into that sort of a visit that you were actually involved in.
There's a significant amount of planning, a lot of liaison as well. My role was dealing with like the overt, some of the overt security arrangements, the uniformed officers doing a specific role around intelligence gathering and evidence gathering. So we mainly focused on the protest side of things. So the protests in central London, I then took teams up to Durham because, if you remember, George Bush actually visited Tony Blair's home constituency and went and had lunch in a local pub. So that brought its own security challenges in trying to secure a reasonably small village in Durham with all the American, the motorcade, etc., that accompanies a visiting president. So we had our own challenges during that visit, but a lot of our stuff was done, and there were public-facing events. You know, as I said, Mr. Bush was out on the streets doing a tour through central London that we had to manage. Then we had the event up in Durham, which again was in public streets. Mr. Trump's visit, conversely, is at two secure locations. So Slightly different times, slightly different threats, but they both bring their own challenges and an awful lot of planning and a lot of collaboration between UK law enforcement agencies. And we do work very closely, especially with the Americans, because they visited on quite a few occasions. We're used to dealing with them and speaking with them and working collaboratively with them. So the overt side and the covert side, Secret Service agents, our own protection teams. Bear in mind, we've got our royal family as part of this visit as well. So they have protection teams. The Prime Minister has a protection team. They'll work very closely with the American Secret Service.
Right, so you're making it sound like a very well-oiled machine in terms of, what goes into the planning a state visit of this kind. And you talked about that visit to a country pub back in 2003 by the then US President George W. Bush. I mean, from what I'm gathering from you, it wasn't a spontaneous visit, it was a planned visit. But do you think on this trip to the UK, we might see some spontaneous things that are perhaps not announced, that, we might see President Trump go into a country pub? I mean, or do you think that's off the cards?
I think that's off the cards. I think he'd probably like to, but bear in mind he was only over in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, so I think he has it within his power to do those sort of things. But I would like to think his security advisors, his protection detail would probably advise against it in the current climate, etc. And it does, that visit back in 2003, there was a significant amount of planning as to how we were going to get all the vehicles into a small village and into a local country pub. There was a lot of advanced meetings where we recce'd the area, looked at the routes in and out. There were plans set to how we got into the area and back out again. So there was an awful lot of coordination and planning went on just for that dare I say, that lunchtime visit, which was reasonably short in the context of things, but significant amount of planning before. And so I think in the level you're at as a president of the United States, you can't just almost do things off the cuff. I think your security teams would have an awful lot to say about that, and they do need to put some plans in place to make sure that he is safe. And you look at the history behind Mr. Trump, etc. And again, that incident last week, I really can't see anything spontaneous happen on this visit.
Right, and we're expecting to see many more helicopter trips than we are, motorcade journeys up and down the Mall and things like that. I mean, what sort of a difference does that make? I mean, is it considerably easier to police the shuttling to and fro of a US president by helicopter than it is by road?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, we've had them over at G8 conferences and G20 when again, helicopters is used as opposed to road travel. So if it is an option, I think most protection officers, security details would prefer that, because you're isolated, you're contained up in the air. The motorcades have to travel through various road networks. There's traffic. There's all sorts of things that can happen on the road. So it's a fairly tense affair once you get in the vehicle until you get out at the other end. So I think it's for me anyway, looking at it, it's preferable. It's a lot quicker. It's a lot easier. The vehicles actually travelled this morning. I watched the vehicles. They left the residents in central London and made their own way to Windsor and arrived some considerable time after the helicopter. It was a few minutes helicopter ride, whereas by road, it's probably about 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, even with a protected escort, almost like conveying you along there.
OK, so clearly the world's changed, since 2003, during that 2003 state visit we've been talking about. But has it changed for the better as far as policing is concerned? I mean, have you got, are there new tools and techniques out there? I mean, obviously we've got AI, we've got drones, the like of which, clearly didn't exist in 2003. I mean, has it got easier or has it got more complicated policing stuff like this?
Both. It's got easier in some respects. We didn't have drones when I was policing. A drone would have saved me an awful lot of shoe leather and steps, walking up and down routes, etc., and round. Put a drone up, I could have sat in a van and just literally had an aerial view of the whole scene and looked at what I needed to look at. So in that respect is better, but by the same token, a lot more complications. Social media, people posting possibly aspirational intentions, aims, objectives that you don't know whether they're actually going to go ahead and do them. So in some respects, it's become, with the technology, some of the technology assists policing and security operations, and accreditation, that sort of thing, is a lot easier to manage these days with automation. But by the same token, it's become complicated in some areas because the world has become smaller with the internet, with social media, etc. Everybody knows what's going on. They can see what's happening almost instantly, and dare I say it, they can react to something a lot quicker than they used to back in 2003 or even before. When I started policing, you got your news at 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. in the evening, but literally nowadays it's within a minute something happens. It's on the internet and you can see it, and that can cause people to literally come out on the streets and react to something instantly, as opposed to a day or 2 days later. So it works both ways for me. It has become easier in some respects, but also a lot more complications these days.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, the killing of Charlie Kirk is a kind of a good example of the era we live in. You know, that information transmitted around the world pretty instantly. And I'm just wondering what your reaction was when you heard that news, knowing there was a state visit in the pipeline. Did you immediately think that's going to create another layer of complication to the already pretty sophisticated security and policing operation surrounding this visit?
Yeah, instantly I thought straight away that would generate an urgent meeting about the security arrangements, an urgent meeting about the tactical arrangements, the logistics, the whole plan, etc. will be reviewed from start to finish. So, I knew whoever was involved in the planning of it, from the UK side and the American side, will be having a few lengthy meetings, just going over the whole plan in minute detail to make sure they were fairly secure, they were fairly comfortable with everything they'd done. They would review everything again, go and look at everything, give it a second look again, and make sure their security protocols and plans met what was needed based on what happened last week.
Yes, we got that event in the United States last week. There's been some big protests in the United Kingdom in the last few days as well. There seems to be a bit of public disquiet in the UK, well, quite a lot of it. And you've mentioned the President Trump assassination attempt in July of last year and subsequent attempts we understand since then. Does it feel to you like there's a heightened tension across the world? Or do you think, that's just our minds playing tricks on us and it was just as tense back in 2003?
It didn't feel as tense back in 2003, but maybe it's because we didn't know about it as much. As I said, it's everything's available on the internet within seconds these days, so people actually can react, can post their views and opinions, which we didn't have in 2003. I think we're more aware of what's going on, so we're more aware of maybe what's being posted, what's being said, what's being threatened by people, which might be, as I said, just aspirational. It might not be achievable, but on many occasions. But you read it, and people sadly believe a lot of what they read on the internet, and a lot of it is inaccurate and false. We had a large demonstration on Saturday in London. There's a demonstration taking place now in London against Mr. Trump's visit. So there's like a counter demonstration opposing his visit in central London as we speak. So that's walking down towards Parliament Square to hold a rally there, as they did the last time he came over. So it just feels there's an awful lot of tension at the moment from different people with different causes across the world, but specifically in the UK, the migrant crisis seems to be generating an awful lot of discussion, debate, and dare I say it, tension between different parts, different halves of the political spectrum. And that's what's causing the most issue at the moment in the UK. They're labelled left and right wing, which the media like to put a label on groups, and that's probably an accurate-ish description of the two halves. But an awful lot of tension, frustration and anger, and resentment even at the government almost like not acting to deal with this. They've been in power just over a year, and we still have what the boat crisis, the boat issue from people arriving by boat illegally and landed in the UK.
So clearly a lot of public frustration. And just going back to how such a visit is coordinated between the two sides. Obviously the British and the Americans have a good working relationship when it comes to intel matters anyway. But when it comes to a state visit like this, do you remember from your own experience any red lines where the Americans said, we want this, and the British said, absolutely not on our soil? And for example, British police officers don't always carry guns, which for an American police officer sounds like a strange thing. Are they allowed to carry guns on the US side when they're protecting the president in the US? In the UK?
My recollection is that there are some of their security and Secret Service personnel are allowed to when they're here. They were in 2003. Not all of them, but yeah, a large contingent. But they get that approved through the Home Office, Foreign Office. So there's an awful lot of engagement at government level that the security detail can carry their sidearms, etc., their firearms. That's for my recollection. That was allowed back then. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that's done now. I can't ever imagine them going anywhere with the president and not being allowed to protect them to the best of their ability, which for the American Secret Service would mean having their firearms available to them. But they would still work, and they'd be told they'd be subject to UK law. Use of force, discharging firearms, etc., or even drawing them would still be subject to a certain degree to UK law, albeit they're probably covered to some extent by maybe diplomatic immunity. But again, those sort of decisions were way above my level back in 2003. But I just remember, I think anecdotally, there were some of the Secret Service personnel that were authorised to carry firearms here, and I've no doubt that's going on at the moment.
Do you recall any tensions between the two sides where, there was a mismatch of expectations, a mismatch of policing techniques between the British and the Americans?
No, not really. I think even if there were I'd almost label them misunderstandings as let's do this and this, and we're going, well, we don't actually do that here. We do it slightly differently. This is why. Once you explain it and discuss the operational plan, the objectives, the aims of the policing operation, and why we do things a certain way in the UK that isn't maybe done the same way in America. Once they actually understood what we were doing and why we were doing it, I wouldn't describe them as red lines as such. There were some discussions around how we were going to achieve the objectives of the operation. But essentially, the aims and objectives were the same for both sides. It's just how you reach those aims and objectives. And clearly, we police slightly differently in the UK than they do in America, and it was just almost like trying to get the two to match up.
I mean, people will be wondering what sort of a price tag is attached to the policing of a state visit like this. I mean, what sort of numbers are doing the rounds in the UK? Anyone sort of guesstimating what this is all going to cost?
I haven't seen an estimate yet. I know I can't remember what the estimate or the cost was back in 2003, but I think as an example, in London today, there's about 1,600 police officers on duty to deal with the protest. And those officers in the UK, we don't have a reserve of public order or protest/demonstration officers. There's not a unit specifically assigned just to deal with protests. Those officers are all taken from response police teams. So the officers that would normally be dealing with 999 calls are taken off their normal shift and put onto public order type serials, so dealing with protests and crowds. And the same with the security. The officers in uniform securing Windsor Castle stand around the outside of it, and police in Windsor Town Centre, and the same when they get to Chequers, will all be normal officers from shifts from emergency response teams in the UK who would ordinarily be dealing with emergency calls and assisting the public. So it does have a huge knock-on effect, because a lot of those officers will have had their rest days cancelled to do these next couple of days, and you then have to take those at some point in the future. So it does impact on frontline operational policing significantly when these state visits take place, because either today, or definitely today, and then maybe in a week or two's time, at least 2 or 3 of your team that you should have on duty in a couple of weeks' time will actually have taken today off in 2 weeks' time. So it has a knock-on effect throughout policing. It will be across the UK, not just within London or within Windsor. They will have taken officers from across the UK. I've seen officers from Wales policing London today. They've been brought from Wales down to London to assist the Met police the protests.
OK, and just lastly, Graham, I mean, you've described a state visit that is in many ways taking place behind the thick walls of a historic castle, which I can imagine does reduce some of the risk and some of the headache of policing it, and the president being shuttled from central London to that castle by helicopter. Again, that reduces another policing headache. If you were advising the organisers of the security of this visit, what would you tell them to be particularly aware of? Are there any vulnerabilities or any areas where you think they really need to keep their eye on the ball?
I think you always have to. You can't switch off with these because of the type, the individual you are protecting, President of the United States, the background, the history. In some areas, he's a fairly controversial figure. In others, he's seen as almost like hero status. So there's two opposing elements or factions there. As we've mentioned already, he's been subject to couple of assassination attempts, and his close friend was murdered last week. So the threat is always there. So you can't ever, if I was saying anything, it's like don't switch off. You might think that one is in a castle, so it's very, very secure. He's then going to Chequers, another very secure environment. But you can't afford to switch off on any of these events. When you think you've covered everything, then go back over and just make sure you've done it again. You know, cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure everything's done, make sure everybody's briefed properly and is alert and aware, because you never know when something's going to happen. It's always the unexpected that tends to catch you out in policing. You can't, you know, no plan ever survives first contact. It was the old adage. So you can have a great plan put in place, but then, you know, something happens, maybe they can't use a helicopter, they have to go by road, but they'll have a backup plan for that. But you need to check all your backup plans up until actually, you know, the last moment, because you might need to change something very, very quickly. You know, something could happen at Chequers, they have to go somewhere else. So you always need to be aware, on your toes, and ready to change your plan at a moment's notice. So you just need to be switched on and ready for the next couple of days.
All right, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. Graham Wettone, former Met Police Officer, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you so much.
Well, we're going to stay with President Trump's visit to the United Kingdom and turn to our next guest, Mick Mulvaney, former Chief of Staff to the US President Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mick. Always a pleasure talking to you. You're probably remembering with, I hope, some affection, your own visit to the United Kingdom in June 2019, which is when President Trump last was afforded a state visit. What sort of memories spring to mind from those events of 6 years ago?
Oh, you know, a couple of them are very inside baseball. As someone who was heavily involved in putting on state dinners at the White House, just to watch the precision with which the event in London came off was impressive to me from a technological, sort of practical standpoint. But from a more policy-oriented, more maybe subjective analysis, I remember very vividly the relationship that the president developed with both, at the time, the Queen and then Prince Charles, now King Charles, and the friendship that I think sort of started to build up between, especially the two gentlemen. They got along extraordinarily well. They seemed to, they had some common interests. They don't agree on architecture, for example, but they both are students of architecture. And of course, people don't realize this. Donald Trump has won several environmental awards for his golf courses, one of which bumps up against one of the royal estates in Scotland. So there was a broad variety of discussion that went off seamlessly, which is exactly what you would expect from the royal family.
Okay, this is of course a historic state visit because it's the second state visit Mr. Trump has been given. It's a very rare honour. Why do you think he's getting such a rare honour?
Well, for a variety of reasons. It is 6 years on, which I think a lot of people realize, that it's been quite a while. You have new government leadership, you have new leadership in the monarchy. So I think it's appropriate to do that and to have this meeting. And certainly the relationship, I think back in 2019, we were in the middle of Brexit. Now it's finished. So this, while it's still the same two countries and some of the same people, a good deal of time has passed. I think it's appropriate to sort of have this meeting to continue to build the special relationship between the two countries.
And of course, this is an event that, you know, when you look at it on television screens, I mean, you'd almost say it was made for television, all the pomp and pageantry and the carriages. And, you know, and the US brings a lot of excitement to the table as well with helicopters and the Beast and all the rest of it. How closely followed is this in the United States, this kind of a state visit?
Yeah, ordinarily the answer to that is not very much. We don't pay attention to state visits, generally speaking. The time zones often contribute to that. But this is different. You know that the American public follows what happens in the UK, especially with the royal family. So there's that interest at that level. The pomp and circumstance will be unparalleled. I remember getting my instructions for the white tie dinner at Buckingham Palace, and they sent over the protocol officer from the State Department, and they made it very clear to us that there is no higher level of protocol than a white tie dinner with the monarch. So it is the very highest sort of pinnacle of these types of things. And you're right, the pomp and circumstance, which Trump loves, does appear to be made for television, but it's great for television. So no, I think this one will be closely watched for a variety of reasons back home.
You say Trump loves this. I mean, what does he like about a visit like this? What did he say about his last visit? What made him say this was such a great trip?
Yeah, look, he loves these types of, he loves the pomp and the circumstance. He's a made-for-television person, not just a made-for-television president. I mean, he made his name for himself. I know him as a businessman who wrote books about business and so forth, but most people in this country know him as a television star. And he understands that medium very, very closely, very precisely. And sometimes you wonder if he's not sort of, tailoring things for television. In fact, I think he probably is. So this is going to have tremendous value to him, tremendous value to the American public, and I think tremendous value to the relationship between the two countries. But it's going to be fun to watch. I don't often miss my job in the White House, but I certainly am a little bit envious of my colleagues who will be attending this trip, because it is truly, well, I used to say it's once in a lifetime, but I guess for some of them it will be twice.
Yeah, well, certainly for President Trump. I mean, just casting your mind back to June 2019, I mean, it sounds like everything went really well, but were there any glitches? Did any sort of protocol issues stand out for you as being perhaps a little bit of a hiccup, shall we say?
No, other than having Americans try to find out what you wear to a white tie dinner, which we don't ever do. We have black tie dinners. I ended up having to borrow Larry Kudlow's tails and his jacket because I didn't have them, and many of us don't. So no, there were no hiccups. It was extraordinarily smooth. I think we landed in the morning, had luncheon at Buckingham Palace. I sat with the Queen, with now the Queen, with Camilla, and then the president, I think, arrived at one point by helicopter on the back lawn to watch the dressing of the lines and so forth. Stunning visuals. But no, I don't remember. Tom, it's a good question. I don't remember anything not going off exactly as it's supposed to. Which, again, when you're talking about something of this scale, is a minor miracle.
It certainly is. I mean, it's also sort of what many think the British are best at, putting on sort of choreographed events and marches and parades and this sort of thing. And I wanted to ask you, obviously the UK is rich in terms of heritage. It's got castles, it's got these monarchs, it's got jewels, it's got all these ingredients. And I want to ask you, as a non-UK citizen, do you think that gives the United Kingdom some sort of an edge over other countries?
Oh, it does, but it's more than just that. It's not the jewels or the pomp and the circumstance. It's the culture. The reason you and I can have this conversation is that we speak the same language, and the histories are very closely intertwined. So yes, all of the things you've just mentioned are important, and it's one of the reasons that we sort of follow British politics or the British royal family sort of like a sport. We pay attention to it. It gets good media coverage here and so forth. But that's just the surface. What you're really talking about is a cultural, almost familial relationship between the two countries. And I think the events like this just bring out the very best in that. This is not the be all and end all. This is sort of this is not the substance of the matter. This is the icing on the cake, as we say in American English.
You're making it sound like the state of the health of the transatlantic relationship is pretty robust.
Well, look, we're testing all of our relationships right now. I think I'd be naive to not say that's the case, including with some of our longtime allies. Look at the relationship right now, which is fairly well strained with Canada. So Trump is trying to reset all of the relationships. Yes, he is. He's trying to reset sort of that Cold War mentality about America carrying the rest of the West on its military backs and so forth through both our defense policies and our trade policies. All of those things are true. But your question is a good one. Is this relationship in a good position? It is. There's a reason, I believe, that you folks invited Trump on this visit, and I believe there's a reason he accepted. He wants this relationship to continue to thrive. Keep in mind, his mother is Scottish, born in Scotland. One of the most touching things I think I remember from and I know it's not your question, but it is an interesting memory. The dinner at Buckingham Palace, on the way out, I believe they had brought a bunch of things out of the British Museum, including some things that were specific to the Trump family. They brought the Trump family tartan, which I believe Donald is McLeod, and they brought out the family tartan for that. And that was very touching to him, and he really appreciated that. So there's a lot more to this relationship than just this. It's very, very deep, but it is a relationship we don't have with hardly any other country in the entire world.
You've mentioned the strong ties between President Trump and the now King, and back then in 2019, the Prince of Wales. You haven't mentioned the Prime Minister, and at the time, just casting our minds back to June 2019, well, for people who know British history, it was 1 month later that Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, was ousted from her job, and Boris Johnson replaced her. Was she looking vulnerable back in June 2019? Because you haven't mentioned her. I mean, was she sort of overlooked on that visit?
Yeah, I didn't not mention her on purpose. But no, I don't think she got along very well with Trump. Listen, some people don't. A lot of people don't. I mean, he's a very complex figure, and he can grate on some people. And I just don't ever think Theresa got on the same page as Donald Trump. Boris certainly did. Boris Johnson, I remember meeting with him at the G7 in Biarritz later in 2019, and he and the president got along famously. All of that being said, I think Keir Starmer has actually done as good a job as anybody. I was a little bit surprised at how well he was received when he came to Washington, D.C., and how strong the relationship was, especially in light of the fact of some of the things that Starmer and some of his team had said about Donald Trump before the election. But I have to tell you that from an objective outside sort of perspective right now, someone who's not on the inside, so the outside looking in, but who knows how the place works, I think Keir Starmer is as on a good a footing with Donald Trump as any other world leader.
It's interesting because domestically, he looks really vulnerable. I mean, some of the opinion polls suggest he's the most unpopular leader in the Western world, and that's really quite saying something. And, you know, when you think about the psyche of President Trump, and you know him better than anyone, and maybe you can bring something to the table on this, I mean, he doesn't seem to like weak people. And, you know, Sir Keir Starmer looking vulnerable politically at home, do you think that somehow undermines the relationship a bit?
No, I don't. Keep in mind, and this is the case, I think, in democracies across the world, you can be popular at one level and unpopular at another. Look, Donald Trump is a lot more popular in the United States than he is amongst Western European leaders. I can guarantee you that his approval rating amongst, say, the Germans and the French leadership would be extraordinarily low, but his approval ratings back home are very high. So those two, it's not unusual to have that sort of disconnect. No, I think Donald Trump likes people that he can do deals with, folks that he can speak frankly to, folks that he understands and has things in common with. And I think Keir has done a pretty decent job with that. So no, does it help him fix things domestically? It does not. But look, the job of any world leader is multifaceted. And again, I think as poorly as he may be doing domestically, he's pretty good with Donald Trump right now.
You mentioned Canadian sovereignty, and obviously the King of England is also the King of Canada. That's one possibly slightly thorny issue. Then there's obviously tariffs, there's Ukraine, there's Gaza. I mean, a lot of complicated conversations to be had, some perhaps thorny issues. And the King thrust into this position of really diplomat in chief in many ways. How skillful do you think the King of England is in this domain?
From everything that I saw in the trip in 2019, I thought he was extraordinarily competent. And again, I thought, and I can't stress this enough, Tom, his connection with Donald Trump was real. I don't believe they had met before that trip in 2019, but I think they generally enjoyed each other's company because, as I mentioned, those shared interests in things like architecture and the environment. People say, "Oh, Donald Trump is a transactional guy." We all like to do business with people that we like better than we do doing business with people that we don't like. Relationships matter. We're human beings. And I think there was a connection that these two gentlemen could be friends, and that always helps. It also helps you get through, for example, tough issues, as you just mentioned. Look, it's not going to be all, roses and butterflies on this trip. There's going to be trade issues to deal with. There's going to be Gaza to deal with, as you mentioned. I don't think the Canada thing is, I've never understood that, Tom. Part of me just thinks it's Donald Trump trolling the left, which he likes to do, sort of sometimes to just sort of prod them and get a response out of them. So I'm not sure that's going to be front and center on this discussion. But yeah, there's going to be some tough issues to deal with because there are tough issues in the world. But I keep coming back to the same thing. I think they're going to be able to talk about these in a way that Trump probably wouldn't talk about them with other world leaders.
Okay, so perhaps President Trump will give the King a bit of a nudge and say, don't take the Canada stuff too seriously. Perhaps that's a conversation they're going to have. One person that President Trump doesn't seem to like at all, and who doesn't seem to like him either, is the same mayor of London who was mayor of London back in 2019. I'm talking about Sadiq Khan. I mean, he's presumably going to be kept out of sight during this visit. What do you think President Trump has against him?
I don't know. Look, Trump doesn't like Democrat mayors. And I know that Mr. Khan is not technically a Democrat, but in our world, that's what he would be. I mean, look at Donald Trump loves cities. He does. He's a New York City boy, born and bred, and he wants to see vibrant and prosperous cities. And I think probably he's taking some of the same experiences that we've had in this country with Democrat-controlled cities and projecting that onto London. And of course, London is having some of the same issues that some of the larger cities in our country are going through. Keep in mind, I think 20 of the top 22 cities in my country are controlled by Democrats, and many of them have been for more than a half a century. So I think it's that experience, his own experience in the United States around left-leaning leadership of large cities. And he's looking at Mayor Khan and saying, well, this is more of the same. This is the same as Gavin Newsom, who's not a mayor, obviously, but mayors of Chicago, mayors of Los Angeles, mayors of New York, and so forth, that he thinks are pointed in the wrong direction. So I think it's just a carryover from his American experience.
Again, obviously in 2019 there were protests. We can expect there to be more protests. Well, there already apparently are some protests in London today. I mean, are they embarrassing for the president? Did he take that personally from your recollection of 2019? The fact that people were out on the street, there was that big balloon of President Trump or a depiction of President Trump. Did that annoy him, embarrass him? What was his reaction?
Embarrassed is not the right word. At some point, I mean, I don't think anybody would like it if we're being made fun of in front of tens of thousands of people. That being said, when you choose to do what Donald Trump has done for a living, and to be president of the United States, you know this comes with the territory. It just does. Look, the left has been doing it to Republican presidents forever. They protested George Bush. They protested Ronald Reagan. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, many Brits thought that, Reagan was dead set on blowing up the world in a nuclear war. So this is part and parcel of the job. And to a certain extent, I don't want to make too big a deal about this. I think Donald Trump might be disappointed if it wasn't happening. Just because I think he knows that if he's doing the right thing, he's going to make an omelet, he's going to break some eggs, and people are going to be upset about that. So I think if it was just quiet and sort of blasé because Donald Trump was coming to town, then Donald Trump might see that as him not doing his job.
Okay, as we bring this conversation to a close, let me put this to you. Who gains more from a visit like this? The host nation or the visitor, in this case, the President of the United States?
I think it's a fair question, but I think the answer is, and I'm not trying to dodge your question. If it's done properly, it will be mutually beneficial. The whole idea here is to reinforce relationships, and relationships have to be two-way streets. I can't have a good relationship with you if you don't have a good relationship with me. So if it's properly done, as it was in 2019, the relationship will get stronger. And you'll see that, Tom, and this is the one thing we should watch for, is what initiatives come immediately afterwards? What doors are opened on this trip? What conversations are started on this trip that then turn into policies, procedures, and initiatives in the coming days and weeks? I think that's how you can know if this was a successful trip or not. If it's a dismal failure, you'll know that right away because someone will get up and walk out of the meeting. I don't see that happening here. I've seen meetings like that happen. We did that with Kim Jong-un in South Vietnam, in Vietnam. But if it's a successful trip, which you'll see the fruits of it coming in the days afterwards, and that's what I'll be watching for from this side of the Atlantic.
And just lastly, Mick, one memory etched in your memory from that 2019 visit, something that really stood out for you. What would it be?
You mean aside from wearing somebody else's suit to the dinner? The arrival of the president via helicopter on the back lawn of Buckingham Palace and the reception there. Still, as I sing here saying, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's the type of thing that we don't have as Americans. We have helicopters, we have troops, but it was one of the most visually and even orally. It was the sounds, striking type of experience I've had. Again, you would say it's once in a lifetime, but for some people, it's not.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Mick Mulvaney, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
Now, turning our eye to other world news, and specifically to the Middle East. And the civilian death toll in Gaza is continuing to rise as Israel pushes its ground invasion of the Strip's largest city. That's despite growing international condemnation. Well, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says Israel shows no interest in a peaceful outcome. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Olga Cherevko, who is a spokesperson for OCHA in Gaza. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Olga. I gather you're in Deir al-Balah, which, for the benefit of our viewers, is a city about halfway down the length of the Gaza Strip, equidistant between Gaza City and Khan Yunis. Just tell us what the situation is like there in Gaza today.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yes, I am here in Deir al-Balah, and here the situation is very, very desperate. It is getting much more crowded than it already was. People are looking for spaces to sleep anywhere they can find. And as we have said repeatedly, there is a very, very small area of Gaza that is currently not either under displacement orders or in otherwise militarized areas. So people are in need of food, of shelter, of water, medical care, and everything is in very, very short supply.
Indeed, and I mean, food insecurity has been a recurrent issue for several months now. What level of supplies, what sorts of quantities of supplies are managing to reach people that need them?
So there's some supplies that are entering. There has also been a limited commercial supply entering for the past few weeks. But the issue is that the conditions on the ground are not allowing us to deliver at scale to meet people's needs, which means that we continue to face delays to pick up supplies. We continue to face many denials of missions and obstructions, as well as the routes that are provided to us by the Israeli authorities are extremely limited and many times dangerous. And I'll give you an example. I was in Gaza City just 2 days ago, and the mission that I was on actually took 2 tries, which sometimes they take many more. But the first day we got to Wadi Gaza Bridge, which is just south of Gaza City, and we were told to turn around because the mission had been denied from that point on. Then the next day we went back, and it took us 14 hours to complete the mission to deliver supplies, medical supplies, to Gaza City. And these kinds of delays, they happen all the time, and missions take 20 hours sometimes and even more.
So when the Israelis say to you, mission denied access, are you given a reason for that?
Well, sometimes we're told it's security reasons, there's operational reasons, and that's about the limits of it. But what we tried to do, for example, with this mission that took 14 hours the other day, we requested a different route because the route that we were on, it was extremely congested because until that point, it was the only route designated for the people to flee. And of course, there's thousands fleeing from the north. Many are on foot. Many are those who are able to rent vehicles to move their supplies there in those vehicles. So it is completely, the traffic had come to a standstill. So people were spending hours and hours waiting on those roads. And of course, we were taking the same road. So when we asked for a different route, we got no response. So we had to proceed on the same route.
I want to ask you specifically about the situation in Gaza City in a moment, because having said you've just been there, and obviously much of the military campaign by the Israelis is focused on Gaza City, but we'll come on to that in a minute. I wanted to ask you about something else. You're quoted as describing a distinct smell in the Gaza Strip in some of the material I've read. Just for the benefit of our viewers, describe that smell. What is it?
Well, it's a smell of dead bodies. It's a smell of decaying bodies because obviously this is there are remains that are buried under the rubble in many parts across Gaza, and really anywhere you walk, you can smell it quite strongly.
And have you, in your career as a humanitarian, ever smelt or seen anything like what you're seeing and smelling every day there?
I have in a few other places, but certainly not to the degree that it is here. It is a very small place, and this is, I think, what makes Gaza unique is that it's only 2.1 million people here, and everyone is in such dire straits. I have never worked in a place where the entire population is in dire need of assistance, and of course the toll of this war on the civilians has been absolutely devastating.
I mean, it sounds like nowhere is safe. Even one of the reports I was reading, a grenade or several grenades hit a hospital, the Rantisi Children's Hospital. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's a hospital that's, catering for children with extremely specific medical needs. Do you have any information about what happened there?
Yes. So there were strikes on the hospital overnight, I believe. This is not the first time that the hospital has been struck. I was actually in this hospital a couple of weeks ago, visiting the various departments and talking to the staff about the lack of space, the lack of medicines, and the various times that they've had to rebuild and rehabilitate various bits of the hospital after the different strikes that they've sustained. So, of course, this is something that is a very stark reality for most healthcare facilities here, and very few of them are operating now. And of course, striking the ones that are still struggling to operate hits basically deals another huge blow to the healthcare system that is really on the verge of collapse now.
Let's talk about Gaza City specifically. It's being reported that Israel's been dropping leaflets on Gaza City, a city that was home to 1 million people. It's estimated about 600,000 people are still there, despite the very obvious dangers of staying. And obviously Israel is trying to encourage people to leave. Why are people so reluctant to leave Gaza City, do you think, despite the very real dangers?
So there are many reasons. One of the reasons, which is the most obvious, is that many people have mobility issues. Some people are disabled. Some people are not able to leave their house. There's another issue that after 22 months of war, people's savings have been completely depleted. And for them to be able to afford to put their things on a vehicle to transport it, to transport their belongings to the south, it's very, very expensive. Many cannot afford it. Then the other issue is the space that I mentioned. There is a huge lack of space. The services in the south are overwhelmed. Again, many are near collapse, and people are really just they don't know where they would go because there is simply no space. Another reason that people may not be able to leave is, and this is something that I was speaking to a friend of mine who is there now and has been trying to figure out a way to leave, but he simply cannot find a car that will take him because all of them are now engaged in transporting people. So everything is booked. So you cannot find a car. So either you do it on foot or wait for a car that becomes available. Today, I met a family in Khan Yunis. I saw them just walking down the street. The father had no shoes. The family had 3 small children. They were walking with two or three small duffel bags. And I stopped them and I spoke with them for a few minutes because I wanted to know where they came from. They came from Jabalia. They had been traveling for 3 days looking for a space in the south to sleep, and they hadn't found one until somebody had told them that they will make a small space for them available in Khan Yunis, and they were near that space when we saw them. But they have nothing. They have not even a sheet to cover them, and it's still extremely hot. They had a baby that was asleep, fortunately, but. Under such sun to walk in 3 days, it's beyond me to understand.
Yeah, I mean, a horrific image you give us there of what reality is like for so many people there. And our sources are telling us that there's some confusion as well as to where people can go, conflicting information. I mean, is anywhere safe in the Gaza Strip right now?
Well, I think experience has shown that truly there is no safe place in Gaza. And I think perhaps this might be another reason that some people are not willing to move, because they have moved so many times up to now. Most people, almost everyone in Gaza has been displaced, and many people so many times that they stopped counting. So, and when they have moved, those places were struck as well. The places that were unilaterally designated as so-called humanitarian by the Israeli authorities. So this was a repeated experience by many people, and as we have seen also on the numbers of our colleagues being killed over the course of this war, we have seen that there's no safe place in Gaza.
Yeah, and you were just mentioning there people who've sort of undertaken the journey down sort of towards the south. And I looked at a map, it's about 30 kilometers from Gaza City to Khan Yunis. It would take about 6 hours on foot if you were able-bodied, but obviously not everyone is, as you've been saying. And what sort of scenes do people find when they arrive in the south? I mean, first of all, you mentioned there might not be any space. Are people also being turned away and told, you know, to go back where they came from?
Well, certainly this family that I met today, they told me that this is what happened to them. They were basically, they were looking for space for 3 days, walking around. And you see families walking in the middle of the night, searching for a space to stay and to put their heads down. And there are many families who are just sitting on the side of the road because I think they're so lost and they have no idea what they're going to do. They're just sitting there for hours and sometimes days. And many of them, of course, have no tents and have barely any belongings. And of course, the tents issue is extremely critical because for more than 5 months, no tents or no shelter materials were allowed. So this is a huge need, and especially for those families who are coming with nothing.
You're quoted as saying this: when Gaza burned and children starved and hospitals collapsed, did you act? When you said that, who are you aiming that message at?
Well, mainly to the international community, to the member states with influence, to those who can enforce international law, who can make decisions that need to be made to stop this war. Because what needs to happen here is not a humanitarian solution. Yes, we can do so much as humanitarians, but what needs to happen is a ceasefire that is permanent. And of course, the release of hostages, everyone who is arbitrarily detained as well. And this must happen immediately, because I really, at this point, I don't know how much more suffering people can take. Everyone is at their breaking point.
I mean, the UN has been saying things, lots of things. The aid groups have been speaking up. Foreign governments have spoken up. There's been global condemnation of Israel, in particular with regards to its actions in Qatar, where it attacked Hamas representatives. I mean, who would you like to see doing what specifically?
Well, it's more basically it's putting words into action. So it is making decisions that will stop this war, and that is up to the member states with influence to decide which decisions these are, because it needs to be about putting pressure to basically lead to a sustainable solution that leads to actual sustainable, meaningful peace.
And when you heard, for example, the UN Commission inquiry, which concluded yesterday that Israel had committed genocide in Gaza, which, by the way, Israel said was scandalous and fake. I mean, I'm assuming you agree with that UN conclusion. I mean, what more can be done beyond drawing such conclusions? I mean, does that change anything, do you think?
Well, this is the thing. Of course, this is obviously this is an extremely serious issue, and of course, a legal definition of something is up to the international courts to decide and conclude. But what worries me is that, regardless of what the international courts decide, we might be too late by the time those decisions are made and those conclusions are made. And the same thing when famine was confirmed. In many ways, we were too late to save people because already so many died. So what needs to happen is we need to act. We need to actually start implementing decisions that will lead to an end of this war, that will lead to protection of civilians, that will lead to expanded access for us to be able to meet people's needs, deliver assistance, deliver services, and start on some kind of a path to sustainable peace.
We're coming to the end. I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions before we finish. I mean, how do you think history is going to judge this particular chapter?
I think it's honestly a stain on our collective consciousness. And I think that is how history will judge us, that in the time of technology, in the time of live streams and all these horrific, grisly images that constantly pass by on everyone's screen, still not enough action was done. And perhaps when it is finally done, it took so long that it cost an unimaginable number of lives that could have been saved. All of this is preventable and could have been stopped much earlier in the course.
And just lastly, I mean, let's talk about you, Olga. You're living right in the middle of the Gaza Strip, quite literally on the map, halfway down it. You've painted a picture in which, you know, world leaders are not doing what you want them to be doing. You're meeting people on the side of the road every day who are in a state of total despair, not knowing where to go, people living in famine-like conditions, the stench of death you've described for us across the Gaza Strip. How do you stay motivated amidst all of that despair, Olga?
Well, I think what keeps me motivated, I think it's having a good team, and it's actually the people that I speak to on a daily basis. It's the people that I meet, because even this family that I met today, this man without any shoes that kept walking, and he was just happy to have heard about a space for his family to go and sleep on the ground on. He had a huge smile, and he was so hospitable, and he was so willing to speak to me and just to tell me his story. I think that is what gives me the motivation to continue, because we have to be here. Because if we're not here, then I don't know what would happen to this place.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate your work. Olga Sharevko, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.